because we've had to focus on internal issues and social policies and so on. But it's something that would need to be a more open discussion than how it has been. I suppose the SNP has been an example where the party moved towards NATO, although a lot of its membership were not happy with that. And it's something I think we'd have to be careful that the discussion in Scotland was open. People were able to really talk about what they thought Scotland should be in the world, rather than just have an idea that Scotland would stay away from conflict, wouldn't have anything within its own borders that was necessarily bad. And I think a lot of people, particularly of maybe my parents' generation, feel that that would be an important part of an independent Scotland, would be its role in world affairs, because they've been campaigning and involved in CND and organisations like that that really had a sense that countries could play a proper role around the world in people's lives, which has really gone from modern politics, I think.
And one of the most risky things to happen would be a great inward turn after a yes vote, where we all, as Rory says, sort of pat ourselves in the head and glorifying our own quiet extraction of wealth from other parts of the world. We have to be more proactive and antagonistic. And if that means exclusion from the likes of NATO, fair play.
Okay, so exclusion from NATO, that's something that a lot of people would agree with. But if we're going to be a bit more prescriptive, what else would any of you like to see? Because, for example, I saw a promise to withdraw from the arms trade, to not be involved in doing that. Now, a lot of people would say you'd lose a lot of jobs, but no, I'd be completely in favour if Scotland was not to be involved in the arms trade at all. That's one for me. Is there any other things you would like to see an independent Scotland doing in the foreign policy arena?
One example is a government that supports increasingly international trade unions and links between trade unions in different countries, and that might mean going against the wishes of other governments in some circumstances, but it's certainly the way forward for trade unionism, and it'd be brilliant to have a Scottish government that supported that.
Rory?
Obviously, it's a pretty tricky issue, but if there are kind of movements, for instance, I can't remember which country it was, and this slightly contradicts my point about Nordic countries being insular and smug, but one of the Nordic states funded anti-apartheid movements in South Africa during the anti-apartheid struggle, and obviously I think Scotland shouldn't be shying away from commitments like that, as long as it could, of course, be sure that it was supporting a kind of emancipatory movement. But it is obviously hard to, take a proactive role in the global economy rather than just kind of saying, oh, well, let's do no harm and retreat into ourselves. But one of the things is to say that you can't sort of hide in the global economy forever. You can't hide from the predations of global capitalism forever, as the Nordic countries are finding out right now, as kind of right-wing parties sweep into power across Scandinavia. And so the other thing Scotland might have to do is, or the Scottish left will have to do, is maintain a base of radical activists who won't become complacent in Scotland's, if Scotland is to become more socially just and so on and prosperous, who won't become complacent because of that, and who will be ready for a kind of another intrusion of kind of right-wing politics into the Scottish sphere, and who will be ready to fight it, and who will be ready to take the opportunities offered by global crises to make even greater gains for the left in Scotland. But I do think it's tricky to come up with, foreign policies that are radical and emancipatory when there's all sorts of associations of what Tony Blair said he was trying to do in Iraq by overthrowing a brutal, well, initially he was getting rid of weapons of mass destruction, but then he started spinning it as overthrowing a brutal leader. You don't want to be dressing up imperialism in red. So yeah, I think it's tricky, but I think it's definitely something that people are going to have to think about a lot more.
But I mean, for me, one of the better ways to think about it is not what the Scottish state can do, but what a Labour Party could do and the Labour movement in Scotland could do with the powers of the Scottish Parliament, thinking about it that way around. And there is a tradition, which in some ways is a cliche, of this kind of diasporic labour movement, which is making connections all over the world. The proactive Scottish Trades Union Congress, the proactive activists who are travelling over Europe. And there's more of a sense that with independence, the labour movement in Scotland could lay claim on the powers of the state to pursue the ends it's fought for decades. The political and global political ends that, to be honest, because there's never been a Scottish state, the trade unionists in Scotland have had to find other channels to pursue. So it's about claiming the power of the Scottish state by the working movement and the trade union movement that only really becomes an opportunity with independence.
What's the beginning, aside from the Scottish independence debate, what's the beginning of reinvigoration of the trade union movement? Because through Thatcher and Blair, and in America through Reagan, and in many other places it's been fatally weakened. But then in places like Venezuela under Chavez, it's been reinvigorated. What do you think might be the steps that would reinvigorate it in Scotland?
One would be having a party that actually stood up for the trade union movement and removed the restrictions that are currently in place, and also that tightened up employment law so that it actually worked in favour of workers rather than of bosses. So, I mean, obviously a reinvigorated Labour Party would make a big difference to the development of trade unions, but I think the other big thing is internationalism of trade unions. For instance, Unite is now working in lots of European countries because you have to challenge global capital on a global basis. And so I think Scotland could lead the way in being part of a trade union culture that is really international.
And on the home front, one of the things I think, and this ties in, that Commonweal get right is that they accept that Scotland's kind of at the cutting edge of services and of finance and of these new kind of sectors, which are more, if you like, precarious or less stable. And traditionally, of course, the labour movement has begun to develop and thrive when workers have seen that it's in their own interest to get involved. And so what the trade unions would have to do in Scotland is find a way on the home front, as I say, of proving that they can act in the interests of working people who don't have the stability of work that traditional trade unions fought to maintain, and that have to kind of stick with working people in and out of work. And if you can build up a movement along those lines, then it will make sense economically in a kind of, if you like, self-interested as well as collective interest way for people to join and become part of a trade union. And that means things like proving that zero-hour contracts are a political issue, taking the fight through Parliament against certain corporations, ejecting them from Scotland and laying down guarantees and duties and mandates on capitalists who want to come to Scotland.
Would you like to see certain labour rights enshrined into any new Scottish constitution? Would you like to see these trade union rights and other things put into the constitution, or is that a matter for day-to-day politics rather than actually in a constitution?
Well, I think constitutions can be useful to an extent with things like this, but I don't think they should be relied on. I think there's a risk of seeing people tweeting or writing about us kind of embedding Scottish values in a constitution. I think Nicola Sturgeon said something about this as well, and making sure that they're preserved for all time. And the sheer complacency of that is just bizarre. And so I think, yes, we can certainly put certain provisions in a constitution, but we should absolutely not rely on a constitution for these things. And we should rely on organised working people asserting and reasserting their power and their interests.
Or to put that another way, we need to embed those sort of ideas in popular consciousness rather than in a constitution. And a constitution is one way of doing that, but there are also many other ways of doing that. And if working people have less grasp over the constitution than they do over the trade unions, then the trade union movement is probably a better vehicle to embed ideas of like working people's rights into popular consciousness.
And I think on that note, that's a good point to wrap up for this week. So to Amy, thanks for coming on.
Cheers.
Callan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much.
And Rory, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Come all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
My daddy was a miner and I'm a miner's son, and I'll stick with the Union till every battle's won.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Don't scab for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are